Gentlemen, pleasure to have you around the table. And let's do this.
And we go a little something like this. Hit it.
Better put these back on here a second. All right, as the singing cowboy once sang, I'm back in the saddle again. And as Bo Derek might agree, this group I've gathered today is a perfect 10.
Come on.
All the starters are back in the game, and they've come to play. I've got the two Mikes, Carl and Height. They're here today. I've got Larry Schultz and Bill Stubblefield, and that's no lie. I've got Joe Ferretti, too. I think he's finally dry. Joe, how you doing there?
So far, so good.
The initial line was, I've got Joe Ferretti, too. I think he's floating by, but I thought that was in really poor taste, so I took that one out. Joe was fortunate.
Good idea.
Yeah, I think Joe was fortunate in that he didn't get the worst of Helene, but there's bad news on the horizon with FEMA on the scene. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas says FEMA doesn't have enough funds to last the hurricane season, so Congress is going to have to come up with more funds, it stands to reason. I found it ironic that in the same week we had a dock workers strike that got canned, Levi Strauss revealed they were selling their Dockers brand. You remember Dockers, the pants for the man with the middle-aged spread? Well, men stopped buying them. I think most of them are dead. Besides politics, it was a big week for outer space news if you're a Karen, due to the discovery of hydrogen peroxide on Pluto's largest moon, Charon. That's correct. The James Webb Telescope detected the presence of hydrogen peroxide on Pluto's largest moon out there in space, which I guess means that even Plutonians have bleached blondes among their Plutonian race. Back here on planet Earth, we had a good old legislative special session called by West Virginia Governor Jim Justice, if you were guessing. The legislators reported from all over the state's hills and hollers, and at a daily rate for the state of more than $50,000. Like many of you this week, I watched the vice presidential candidates debating, and just like you, I found the entire thing entirely frustrating. They were civil to each other, and to say that is fair, but I still don't know if Tim Walz was at Tiananmen Square. I know he took teams to China, and he said he's a knucklehead, but answer the question, Tim, is close to 10. I've got to go to bed. Not to be topped, we had the J.D. Vance Curly Shuffle when he was asked about the whole January 6th kerfuffle. When asked if he would participate in a January 6th repeat, J.D. Vance suddenly became very light on his feet. He may have set a new question dodging mark as the one who's the worst, when he not only dodged the original question, but dodged the follow-up asking why he wouldn't answer the first. Not only do these folks not answer the questions correctly, they don't even bother answering them indirectly. Imagine if everyday life was like a debate in the exact same way, and every time you asked somebody a question, it was a complete waste of your day. Like what if, hey waiter, what's on the menu, was answered with, great question, let me tell you how the food got to this venue. You ask your wife, hey honey, have you been having an affair? She responds with, thank you for that question. First let me start with, you've got a beer gut and you're losing your hair. You go to your doctor and you ask about your health, which is foul, and he says, I prefer we talk about the future. Speaking of which, you'd better pay your bill now. Now I know what you're thinking, Rob, where's all this going? But you have to know I'm not answering based on what I've been showing. So next time you watch a debate, keep your eye on the ball, while your favorite politician decides to not answer a question, and I mean not at all.
You know, you need to forget about the four of us, Rob, and just continue your morning spiel. That was fun.
A friend of mine says that he's now got a new plan for when he gets pulled over for speeding.
Yes.
He's going to say, sir, I'm focused on the future.
That may be the only answer out there. With issue number one, Mr. Joseph Joey Toots Ferretti.
Well, Rob, I'm going to try and focus on the future, and that is the immediate future. But let's take a look back first before we talk about the future. In 2012, when Mitt Romney and the incumbent, Barack Obama, were running for president, in October, just a month before the election, it was a dead heat. Pew Research indicated in their polling that it was 46% each for those two. And they were battling it out. They were having debates. But lo and behold, in late October, a storm called Superstorm Sandy ravaged the East Coast, made landfall in New Jersey, just south of New York City, and we know what happened there afterwards. Flooding, death tolls, hundreds of people died. billions, close to $100 billion in overall damages sustained in that storm. Now, the response to Superstorm Sandy, however, became quite an issue very quickly. First of all, Bill Somerville will be proud to know that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration was very accurate in terms of plotting that storm and predicting the effects of the storm to New York, New Jersey, and points in the Northeast. Michael Bloomberg, Governor Cuomo in New York, and Governor Christie in New Jersey all had their states prepared and ready to go to respond to the aftermath of the storm. And the Obama administration received many kudos for the quick disaster declarations and for FEMA responding quickly with aid and supplies to those victims of the storm. In fact, it was Chris Christie who called the federal response to the storm outstanding. Last-minute polling showed a bump for President Obama, and of course we know he went on to win re-election in 2012. So flash forward now to Hurricane Helene and the aftermath of that storm. I'm questioning and wondering for the panel this morning what effects the federal response will have on this election. Is this the October surprise that everyone anticipates and believes it will have an effect on the race? Or are the other issues perhaps maybe even more prominent, such as what's going on in Israel, this magically corrected longshoreman strike that was solved last night, or, of course, the issues with Ukraine and the other major issues of the day? Do we feel that this storm is going to be the litmus test for the current administration, and will it have an effect going forward in our coming election? Or are these other issues going to be just as prominent, or maybe even more so, to the electorate in terms of who they select for president? That's my question.
All right, Joe, while you're talking about FEMA and such, Colin's been sending some of the slides that you sent to us across on our screen so folks can see if they've not previously witnessed any of the destruction in the South. I think one of these photos is of Asheville, North Carolina. That's coming up here in a moment, and just complete and utter devastation here. So, Larry, why don't you go ahead and start with the responses to Joe's opening question?
Sure. I think it could have an effect. Now, most of the states that are affected, save Georgia and North Carolina, are probably not going to flip based on this. But Georgia and North Carolina are very much affected. And I know the South Carolina, I haven't tracked this closely, but the South Carolina governor, a lifelong Republican, has already called a press conference in which he said the FEMA response has been superb. And so to the effect that that message gets across and people are grateful, and the polls can be rebuilt in a time and place where the poor folks who've been run out of their home area can still vote, then I think there is a chance that it will have a tipping effect in those very close two states, North Carolina and Georgia.
Mr. Height.
Yeah, I think it's sort of weird how these things happen. I think if there is a good response, if FEMA does their job and comes in and has a good response, it'll have little effect on the voters and how they vote. However, just the opposite is true. If FEMA comes in and they are deemed a disaster, that they are deemed unprepared, it will have a devastating effect on the current administration and the Harris ticket. So far, I haven't seen one way or the other. And it's interesting that, Larry, that you bring up those particular states, because some of those are battleground states, and that's what is really going to decide this election. So those places like North Carolina and Georgia in particular that are deemed battleground states, FEMA response had better be on point in those areas. But like I said, I don't know if it is on point. I don't know how much it moves the needle one way or the other. But if it's bad, it will really affect the Harris ticket, in my opinion.
Mr. Carl.
Well, I, in my young adult life, spent a lot of time in the
Asheville area with my essentially second set of parents, and I'm really sorry to hear about the damage down there. But I think the potential impact will be not on voter choices, but on turnout, and that, reducing turnout when you're up against these kind of like life experience problems,
Sure.
Could reduce the turnout, and since mostly that's in people that would tend to vote on the Republican side, I think there are risks that way because of this storm.
Billy?
Let me pick up on what Mike Carl said. I think turnout's going to be the key, and also going back to the to FEMA. FEMA was poorly prepared, and they did a pathetic job during Katrina. Since Katrina, I think FEMA has been very responsive, and they've been well prepared. We'll see what happens the after result. As far as the image nationwide, I'm not sure FEMA is getting a lot of attention one way or the other. Certainly in North Carolina, Georgia, they are getting a lot of attention, and as Larry said, in South Carolina. But I think the turnout, as Mike Carl said, is on key. And there's two segments of this in North Carolina. I cannot speak to Georgia. Joe Ferretti can talk to Georgia. But I did a little research prior to this. The Asheville area, which was devastated, is approximately 60-65% that will vote Democrat. So, but the other areas outside of Asheville is much, much heavily toward Republican. Now, if we had the election today, they'd both be equally impacted. We're not going to have the election today. We're going to have the election in 2 or 3 weeks. How quickly can can Asheville, compared to the other parts of the state, be prepared for it? Some of these sections in Appalachia, you cannot even get a car in. You have to use a mule. So there's no way you can get ballots to these folks. And plus the fact, if your world has been destroyed all around you, how much interest you're going to have in voting. So I think there's going to be a lot of apathy through these more devastated places. And I'll come back to the contrast. If today it probably equally impacted, but I suspect 2 or 3 weeks from now, the more rural parts going to be more affected than Asheville, which will be able to recover.
Yeah, we actually have a month and a day
That's
until
right.
election day
That's
right now. This is October 4.
But everybody thinks that area being all Republican. Asheville is the exception. Asheville is primarily Democrat, at least percentage-wise, but the rest of the area is pretty heavily Republican.
Yeah, Joe?
A couple things to watch for regarding the response to this storm. First of all, the scope and breadth of the devastation is unbelievable. And there's going to be communities in western North Carolina and in some of the rural areas of Georgia that don't feel the impacts of FEMA or even state and local relief efforts for weeks. So the misery index is going to be off the charts high because, again, there's just so much that needs to be addressed. And I saw a startling statistic yesterday in an article I read. Less than 1% of the homes in western North Carolina have flood insurance coverage, which means a home that is ruined and has to be demolished will not be covered by insurance. And these people are going to be left to the meager payments that FEMA can authorize for dwellings. And I think the cap is around $45,000. Recall back in Katrina when they were setting up those trailers full of formaldehyde and people were complaining about having to live in them. But that's what FEMA provides you. It's a roof over your head, but it's not much more. And I suspect that there's going to be a lot of hand-wringing about these poor folks who don't have the means of replacing their homes. That's a long-term problem that, unfortunately, the federal government's not going to be able to solve, and private insurance is not in place to help with that situation. So that, I think the misery is going to be great for these folks. going forward, and you're going to hear a lot about that. And I don't know if it's fair to visit that upon the federal government in terms of how it responds to these events. The second thing I'm looking for, guys, is, and I'm on guard for this, exploitation of this issue. It already has started. I was watching Fox News last night, and they were railing about the federal government restricting drones up in the air, where people are trying to search for missing people and trying to see who needs help. The federal government came in and restricted zone flights because they're trying to get their own aircraft in there to help. And, I'm an owner of a drone myself, and I know there's certain areas you can and cannot fly those things. So that's not an issue that the federal government is botching. That is something that is typically in place with regards to the private use of drones. And then you had former President Trump indicating that, and I don't know what the basis is for this, but that relief supplies are being directed to areas that vote Democratic. Again, be on guard for exploitation of these issues. I didn't like the fact that Kamala Harris was in Augusta on the ground, taking resources away from local authorities just to guard her and her people so that she could have a photo op. Those are the kind of things I don't like, and I think as we see this response going forward, we have to be on guard for that kind of stuff. So that's how I think this is going to play going forward. I think it will have an impact on the election. But who knows? Other events in the coming weeks may take over, because we seem to be in a news cycle right now where it's every other day something's popping up that's very alarming.
Bill?
Yeah, going forward, Joe, let's skip over the election and go forward 3 or 4 or 5 years. And the two aspects, insurance. We're seeing in Florida all the viable insurance companies are leaving because of the hurricane damage. So we're having second and third rate insurance companies coming in. It's going to be very, very, very difficult to get insurance in these devastated areas going forward. We're certainly finding in Florida. I suspect you're going to find the same thing in other states as well, coastal states. The other part are building codes. After Andrew and Hugo, the building codes in the hurricane-prone areas were revamped, and the buildings that are being built today are better suited to survive a hurricane than the ones built 25, 30 years or so ago. But there is another change, and that is climate change. We're seeing much more intense rainfalls now than what we have experienced in the past. We're seeing more intense storms. Most of the predictions for future forecasts are based upon historical rainfall data. NOAA has come to the opinion these are no longer viable, so they're going to be revamping all rainfall data based upon the projection more so than historical. So that will be incorporated in future building codes, but right now there's not a lot to protect these homeowners. So.
Mr. Height?
Yeah, while we're on this subject, I just wanted to do a quick shout out to Travis Bishop, who has called upon the ground hero forces once again and is taking donations and planning a trip down to Western North Carolina to provide some goods and services and food and things for the people that are devastated down there. So kudos to Travis Bishop.
You know, on Sunday, 60 Minutes did a piece, Bill, I think you saw it, and it had to do with the insurance industry response to, I think it was the latest hurricane in Florida 2 years ago, exactly 3 years ago?
Right, yes.
Whatever it was. And
2 years or so ago, not this past one.
So you had adjusters who were on the scene who were approving rebuilds and checks for a couple $100,000. And some of the insurance companies were changing the amounts, leaving the adjuster's name on the report without the adjuster's knowledge, and modifying checks that were $200,000, $300,000, and $400,000 down to $13,000, $1,300. Whole roof replacements were being changed to repairs, and it was under the, if you watch the feature, the framework of it was, do you want to sue us? You want to fight it? Do you have the resources to fight us about it? So a lot of these people were pretty desperate at the time, no place to live, or living in homes that were now filled with mold and rainwater. taking the check, because are you going to wait a couple of years and fight this out in court at a great expense to yourself, or do you take the $1,500 or the $15,000 and do the best you can with it? That was the other aspect of this that was brought to our attention by the 60 Minutes report. So there's no small amount of bad actors in these situations.
There are, but part of that, Rob, was because the more responsible insurance companies left a couple of years ago.
Well, and that's what I thought you were getting at when you were talking about that.
And so now they have secondary companies that do not have a large financial base, so they are looking for ways to survive, and they do that by cutting back on the amount of money they pay.
And Joe, this begs the greater question, which many have brought up, and that is, if you're going to build now, obviously in Georgia, 300-something miles from the coast, you're not anticipating a hurricane sitting over top of you for a day and dumping 30 inches of rain on you in western Tennessee and causing the damage that was caused there. But along the coastlines, many have said all along the way, if you build a couple $1 million home on the coast and that coast gets hurricanes, why should the rest of us have to pay your supplement your insurance premiums? That's kind of on you for building a place there. There's that attitude a lot of people have in regards to that, Joe.
Yeah, no doubt. And you wonder why coastal properties, homes, condos, and all still carry a high price tag, because there's a lot of risk involved in owning in those areas. But the insurance industry and what they cover and what they refuse to cover, and what riders you have to tack onto your policy at great expense to the policy purchaser just to have flood coverage and storm coverage. A lot of this insurance is outside of the reach of most homeowners. So they're naked. And when a storm like this comes through, no matter where your home is, whether it's on the coast or it's in a creek valley, and it gets washed away, you're on your own. You've got the federal government meager benefits that are going to be paid, and that's it. You've got to make do with what you get from FEMA and try to rebuild. And in many cases, it's impossible. And I think that's a lesson these folks in North Carolina and the folks in Florida along the coast are going to learn. And it's a shame, but that's the state of the insurance industry today. And adding insult to injury, that 60 Minutes report was I'm sure attorneys like Mr. Schultz and myself, we just nod our head and understand that a lot of that goes on, and it's unfortunate.
It's not news.
Hey, good start. Bill, you're on the clock as we take our top of the hour break here. This is Talk Radio, WRNR Martinsburg and TV 10. Thank you, Joseph. We are rejoined by the Friday 5 crew in studio. Sergeant Michael Height.
Good morning, sir.
Specialist, what was that again, Mike?
Spec 5.
Spec 5, Michael Carl. Lawrence Schultz, who once interviewed with ROTC.
It was a long interview, about 2 years.
About 2 years? Joe Ferretti, who once saw Officer and a Gentleman at the theater. And Bill Stubblefield, who was an Officer and a Gentleman. Yeah. And the Navy, and Noah, he leads off issue number 2.
Well, Rob, one of the disadvantages of following Joe Ferretti is that his interesting subjects invoke a lot of discussion, and by doing so, they covered most of the ones that are my issues. The other issue I had was a dock strike, which was settled last night, so here I am. I don't have any issues, so I'm on a punt, and this is going to be as much a surprise to me as will be my colleagues. We're the final stage of the race, and this is one of the tightest presidential races that we can, that any of us can remember. And the question is, what is it going to take to get over the finish line, to make that final surge? We see both candidates and their surrogates are very active in going such places as what Harris did yesterday to the city that takes claim in the founding site of the Republican Party, campaigning with a well-known Republican. Trump has been very active in traveling in all the battleground states, as has Harris. Everybody says it's a very, very small percent. They don't know if it's undecided votes, are there undecided votes, or is it just trying to get one's base energized? Both parties tend to be doing the same thing, looking for those few undecided and at the same time trying to get their base energized. Harris is going to be on 60 Minutes for an interview. Trump has decided not to do that. They were going to have another debate. Again, one decided to do it. The other one said they would not do it. My question to to my colleagues is, for these final 5 weeks, if you were the candidate, what would you do? What could you do to try to get over this last little hurdle?
Let me start with Michael Carl on this one. Michael.
Well, one of the big uncertainties and that's impacting we had the hurricane, but it is all the military activity and tension in the Middle East, and I think that Trump ought to press harder on supporting Israel, and to see what his opponents how they respond to that. But the great bulk of the anti-Semitism in the U.S. Voter base are registered Democrats, and would be Democrats who would based on their party affiliations vote for Harris.
So are you saying that more Democrats are anti-Semites than Republicans? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's absolutely. In terms of active, fighting, rioting in the streets and all, and attacking, Jews in the U.S. So I think that's one of the uncertain world events that if Trump would exploit it even more, that could be very beneficial, because I think a lot of those anti-Semitic Democrats, if Biden and Harris are pushed to be stronger and stronger supporting Israel, will just stay home.
Mr. Schultz, do you believe Mr. Carl's claim that more Democrats are anti-Semites than Republicans? And also answering Mr. Stubblefield's question.
It's a little counterintuitive to me that people who, as a group, Jewish Americans, are largely registered in the Democratic Party, that they would join the party that Mr. Carl says hates them.
That's the old party, the old Democratic Party.
Well,
not today's.
They're still members of the Democratic Party, the majority of Jewish people. So I'm not so sure I accept this. But to go to the actual question, it seems to me that with his recent dialogue or monologue or whatever you want to call it, where he advance blamed the Jewish voters if he doesn't win the election, which I heard him do in real time, where he said, well, we don't get enough of the Jewish vote, and if we lose this election, it's going to be the fault of the Jews. So I think we need to dial back a little bit on the whole question of who's anti-Semitic and who is not. I'm not sure that can be necessarily laid to a whole party as opposed to laid to a particular person. And so I'm not sure I understand. I think that I question the basis of the assumptions that were made in framing the question. Yeah, there are...
Whose question? My question or Mike Carl's question?
Well, the question that he was raising in answer to your question. So what I would say is this. Lots of people in the Democratic Party are very good, are very pro-Israel. On the other hand, lots of people in the Democratic Party don't believe that launching missile strikes and some of the attacks that the Israelis have made are in the best interest of even Israelis, let alone the innocent Palestinians who've been killed by the thousands, who did not vote for a war against Israel. They ended up with Hamas running their show. It's a very knotty situation, and I believe people will not have a problem understanding that a person can be of two minds about it and just want it to stop. I think that's the majority American view.
In regards to Bill's question of what's it going to take to get Canada over the top, what's your answer to that, Larry, in 30 seconds or less?
To get who over the top?
One of the candidates over the top.
Well, what it's going to take is a nuanced approach like the one that we're seeing right now, where we are helping Israel, but we're also saying to Israel, you got to cut this out. We've got to take that nuanced approach, because this isn't some high school football game where you can just vote for the town that you grew up in. That's not where it works, where it's going to work out.
Mr. Haidt, keeping in mind the original question from Mr. Stubblefield
they're very good at deflecting. Neither one have addressed it.
In a close race, what's it going to take to get Canada over the top? And I appreciate Mike Carl taking on the J.D. Vance role on that last question, and Larry Schultz the Tim Walz role.
So my question has to do with the Israelis, so I won't address that at all.
Bill thanks you.
Yes, I do.
What I think is going to get one of them over the top, the most important factor is to do sort of what they're already doing, and that is to focus on the battleground states. Those are the ones that are going to make a difference. And you have to look at each battleground state and say, what are their major issues in that particular state? You will not see either one of these in West Virginia or Tennessee or Kentucky or any other red state, and you will not see them in some of the blue states like Massachusetts, New York. Those are foregone conclusions. We are almost definite. We know how those states are going to vote, and those electoral college votes are already pretty much already cast. We know. It's the battleground states. It's when you look at Pennsylvania, which is a battleground state, and say, what are the issues in Pennsylvania? Which is why you see the Trump administration talk about fracking a lot, because fracking is an issue in Pennsylvania. But when you look at Pennsylvania and you take the Philadelphia area and the Pittsburgh area and combine them, you've got about 10 million votes. And then you look at the rest of the state,
the Alabama part,
which is red, and there's only about 2 million votes. So you have to have a GOP candidate, Trump, who has to be able to turn some of those cities red in some areas. So he's going to have to work on that. And he's got to do that state by state. Harris is going to have to do the same thing for herself as well. But it's the battleground states and what issues are close to their people that are going to be the big issues for both candidates going forward. And it's going to be the one that can reach those people that is in the end ultimately going to win.
Joe Ferretti.
Just a comment real quick on what Mike Haidt was alluding to. I think it's remarkable that in a country of 350 million people, roughly 50 to 100,000 people in 7 states is going to decide who wins, and they're going to plot the course for this country for the next 4 years. I just is a remarkable set of events. Just a comment. Now, to answer Bill's question about who's going to get over the finish line and why, I'm looking at 2 aspects of this race that I think are going to play out here. Number one, with the administration that's currently in place, the Biden administration, of which, of course, Kamala Harris is a part of, I think the current events are going to shape things for Kamala going forward. Their response to this terrible storm, Israel, Ukraine, the report and release of Jack Smith's filing in federal court, which occurred just a couple of days ago. And, those current events, I think, are going to shape this race for Kamala Harris going forward. And I think the response of the federal government, look, they deserve kudos for the dock workers strike being settled yesterday evening. I think that was pulling a rabbit out of the hat, because my understanding was those sides were far apart, but they got it settled and at in the nick of time, because we need those ports working. And for the other part of or aspect of the race I'm looking at, I'm wondering about the impact of a lot of pretty prominent Republicans coming forward and saying, hey, I'm not voting for Trump. I'm voting for Harris. We had that play out yesterday in Wisconsin that was alluded to with Liz Cheney, and I suspect others are being queued up to do the same kind of thing. And I'm just wondering how that's going to play, and how many people are going to be persuaded, for those few who can still be persuaded, to vote for Harris, given the fact that a lot of Republicans from the former Trump administration and who are still prominent in the party are not going to back Trump. I think that's an important aspect of this race also.
Final thought comes back to you, Mr. Stubblefield.
Yeah, the fact we're so razor thin, a lot of these things that have been mentioned could make the difference. The number of Republicans coming over, the visibility, and the response to in the battleground states. So I don't think it's going to be any one thing. It would be if we had a larger margin, but with just a razor thin margin, I think it's going to be a lot of small things that will make the difference.
Bill, for having all of your topics go up in smoke 5 minutes before the show, that wasn't a bad save.
Yeah, well, I had to punt because in the future I'm not going to give any ideas. I'm going to keep them to myself, and then hopefully Joe Ferretti has a bad day and I'll be able to pull one out.
He was quick on his feet.
Also, Carl tried to hijack your whole subject. Yeah,
but I got to give Mike Carl credit. It's that is one of the factors in the final decision who's going to get it. So Mike was on target there.
Good job, Spec 5.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. All right, the Sarge, Michael Height, you're up with issue number 3.
Well, before I get to my issue, I'm going to push back a little bit on something Larry said earlier about the Palestinians.
Surprising?
Yeah, Palestinians getting stuck with Hamas. The Palestinians voted Hamas in as their government, and they supported that government, and they celebrated that government's October 7th atrocities. So I have a hard time feeling bad for those Palestinians at this point.
So, Mike, as I understand it, you're going to adopt the vice presidential debate principles of answering only the things that you want to answer, not what the host actually throws to you?
I'm actually going to my question now
that you want to?
I pushed back on that. But my question has
Were
to do
you in
with
Tiananmen Square or not? Please answer the question.
I was not in Tiananmen Square. I do remember that happening. I am that old, but I was not there. I think I was on vacation with Tim. Anyway, my question is, what action should the U.S. take now that Iran has taken direct military action against Israel? What should the U.S. do because of that?
I got to go to the Admiral on this one, highest ranking officer in the room.
Yeah, I think from the administration's point of view, and I'm talking politics now, strictly politics, that has given the administration an opportunity to claim some very needed ground now. If it had been between the Hamas and Israel and the Gaza Strip, there's a lot of sympathy toward Hamas. Not totally, but as Larry pointed out, there was a segment.
Not Hamas, but Palestinians.
Palestinians, excuse me, yeah, yes. Palestinians, sorry. But now that Iran's in, that has changed the whole dynamic. People are viewing it more favorable toward Israel and the action that Israel would take, because they're not fighting Hamas or the Palestinians. Now they're fighting the Iranians. I think at a minimum, will supply all the arms Israel needs. We very well may supply some air defense that Israel needs. I don't think we'll ever get to the point of providing boots on the ground, at least at the way the things are framed now. But what it does do, with the Iranian getting in, gives the administration more of an opportunity to overtly support Israel.
Michael Carl.
Well, I agree with that likely, development. I think the current administration should have more strongly supported Israel all along, but I think it'll give them further reason to add to that support and strength in many different ways, and quite frankly, it was their weakness toward Iran that I think needs to be overcome, both in terms of world developments and U.S. politics.
Mr. Ferretti.
Well, I kind of agree with the sentiments expressed. I think we'll continue to provide the means for Israel to defend itself, and in some respects to take affirmative action against some of these Iranian proxies who are lobbing missiles into Israel. And I think we'll continue to have forces in place, carriers and destroyers in the Gulf of Oman and the Red Sea and those places, just to supplement the Iron Dome defenses that Israel has. I don't think we're ever going to see, and I hope we don't see, American troops on the ground or American planes flying into Iranian airspace. I don't see that, and I think that would be a major escalation of events that could really spiral out of control. So I think it'll be status quo in terms of our defense of Israel. And I might add that I would hope it would be status quo with regard to our defense of Ukraine, who those people love their freedom and security just as much as the Israelis do. And they're being attacked by a foreign adversary illegally and improperly. And I think they deserve a defense too. And I would hope that both Democrats and Republicans would be unified in defending both those nations.
Larry?
Yeah, let me first say that whatever action we take, I certainly hope that whoever is president of the United States after Mr. Biden does not pretend that nearly 80 soldiers who suffer traumatic brain injuries simply have headaches and weren't injured at all, like Mr. Trump did just a couple of weeks ago. Having said that, I think we do need to defend Israel. Sometimes, you do your best in diplomacy to stop wars from breaking out, but failing that, the only way to stop them from getting bigger is to make them smaller instantaneously with bombs. And that's a very difficult choice for any person who's president of the United States. And it's a distressing choice if Donald Trump's making it, because to the extent that American military servicemen die or are injured, we're going to hear a whitewashing. So it's a very difficult spot. And I certainly hope we have the right president when the time comes to make that decision.
You're shaking your head no, Mike Carr. What's that about?
Well, it's about the fact that because Trump's willingness to use the national security resources against our enemies, that we didn't have these outright wars going on when he was president. And now I will add that anybody in the Republican flanks who has a problem with supporting Ukraine, they are neo-isolationists, and they are wrong. And I agree, we need to support Ukraine as well as Israel.
That guy with the orange hair may be in the flanks of American life, but he's not in the flanks of the Republican Party. He's the leader. He's against it.
Yeah. Could I ask a question that's kind of germane to this? I find very interesting. Biden says that if the U.S. gets involved and do some bombing of Iran, the nuclear plants will be off limits. They will not attack the nuclear plants. What is the logic for that?
Political?
I can maybe partially answer that, Bill. My understanding is Israel does not have the capability to take out the Iranian nuclear sites, which are very much hardened and very deep underground. The Americans do, but that would require us flying over Iranian airspace with, what do they call them, bunker busting bombs, and trying to get deep into earth to disrupt
those kind of activities that Iran's undertaken. So I think there's a danger there if we go that far. The last time Israel responded to an attack from Iran, they bombed very close to nuclear facilities, but not actually at them. And I think a message was sent then that we know where they are and we know how we can get to those facilities on the surface. But the ones on the ground, I think that would be an American problem, and I don't know if we're willing to go that far.
That's a good point, Joe. And the fact that these large bombs that have to be carried by aircraft, they cannot be deployed with a missile.
So, Mike Kite comes back to you for the final minute to wrap it up.
Well, Israel's always been an ally of ours, and they were attacked a year ago, and they've been fighting a war on two fronts ever since. And our response has been tepid at best. And I'm not sure why. And I think that weak response has allowed Iran to think that they can get away with joining in and bombing Israel as well. And I believe the U.S. needs to be a whole lot stronger in supporting our ally, and needs to be more forceful and take a larger role, especially now that Iran is in the war as well. They need to come in, and I'm not saying with boots on the ground, but I do believe they should maybe start doing some sorties and flying over Iran and dropping a couple bombs here and there and saying, we're not going to tolerate this. Enough is enough. And maybe into Lebanon as well. So I think the U.S. needs to take a whole lot stronger stance.
And on that note, we move away from issue number 3 and put Larry Schultz on the clock for issue number 4, segment brought to you in part by the Mansion Ferretti Law Offices, by WVU Medicine, Berkeley Medical Center, Jefferson Medical Center. This segment of our show today is brought to you in part by Hagerstown Ford, by the Wagner Law Firm, West Virginia's premier DUI defense attorneys, by Larry DeMarco and Company at Century 21 Modern Realty Results, and by the Skinner Accident and Injury attorneys at SkinnerWins.com. In studio with the Admiral Bill Stubblefield.
Good morning again, Rob.
Senior member of the crew, Michael Carl.
Good morning.
The Sarge, Michael Heights.
Good morning.
Via telephone, Joseph Joey Torts Ferretti.
Good morning.
Joe remembered to unmute himself from his phone this week. It's enough that I have to remember to unmute myself. I can't remember to unmute Joe as well. It's too much. And with issue number 4, attorney at law Lawrence Schultz.
Yes, if Donald Trump wins the presidency again, precisely what incentive will he have to do anything but serve himself, given that he cannot run again?
I take it, Larry, you're not a big fan of President Trump.
Well, that's what I've always liked about you, Rob. You're a slow learner, but you always get it.
I'm insightful, that's for sure. All right, Mike Carr, what incentive does President Trump have, if he wins, to do something other than serve himself?
Well, first of all, and I've been a constant critic of Trump's style, but I think his image and self-image is a big deal with him, and I think he is, both based on his 4 years of prior experience and and how things have played out in the meeting since then. I think he will do a lot of things that enhance his image and the respect for him in the United States and throughout the world. And I don't think he lax. I mean, his ego and desire for to promote his reputation, sometimes is managed in a unfortunately excessive way, but it's deep inside of him, and I think he will work hard to enhance his image, and it won't be, okay, well, I checked the last box, so I can just take it easy for 4 years.
Joe Ferretti.
Well, Rob, I remember well sitting in the studio when we were discussing the results of the 2016 election, and I posed the question, could the newly elected Donald Trump work on behalf of 350 million people in this country when his only work experience has been working for his father and himself? And I still have that question today. And to respond to Larry, I think that it is in serious doubt that he can look beyond his own narcissism and perform on behalf of the country in all aspects of the job. This filing that was released by Judge Chutkan in D.C. is just another example, another revelation of how he is only concerned about himself. When an aide rushed into the dining room, the dining hall there in the White House, and said the vice president has been secured, he's under threat, they're screaming, "Hang Mike Pence" on the Capitol grounds, and his response to that aide was, "So what?" That tells you what you need to know about the man. And so, yeah, I have some serious doubts that he's capable of making decisions that are in the best interest of the country when they run adverse to his own self-interest.
Mr. Haidt.
You know, I think the days of presidential patriots are long over. All presidents nowadays, all people running for the office are narcissistic and only about themselves. And Donald Trump just has trouble hiding that. The rest of them hide it very well. They act like they have the best interest at heart of the American people. I don't know that they do, any of them. I think that's one of the appeals to so many people about Donald Trump is he doesn't hide it. Who he is out in the open for all to see. But when I look at the different presidential candidates, the different sides, I look at policies. And what are his policies going to be, regardless of how narcissistic he is, his love of himself? And I believe his policies are the best policies for the United States of America, and that the Harris policies are not. And I look at them from an economic standpoint, I look at them from an immigration standpoint, and I look at them from a foreign policy standpoint. And that is the only reason Trump will get my vote, is because of the policies that he will institute. I find him disgusting, but I find her inept. And I will take disgusting and the right policies over the inept.
Thank God our wives all felt the same. Mr. Stubblefield.
Amen to that.
Thanks for setting them up, Mike. Okay. Yeah, Mike, I'm going to take a little issue with you. In fact, I'll take a lot of issue.
Please do.
That our presidential candidates are all
narcissistic.
Thank you. And they're looking out strictly for their own good. I think we've had a lot of good candidates in recent history that do not fall in that category. And on the Republican side, I think Mitt Romney, I think John Kasich, I think Nikki Haley. All of these folks, I think, have the basic good of the country first and foremost. And I do not believe Trump has that. As far as issues, you mentioned economy. Wall Street Journal has recently come out and said that the Trump economic proposal is going to be much, much more pricey to the country than the Haley economic proposals. It's going to increase
the
Harris. I'm sorry, you're right. Harris economic proposal. So just collecting what some of the bypass throwaway statements are, I don't think are valid. The immigration, if you look at what started with the Biden administration, is markedly different than what they have in place right now. What they have in place right now seems to be working. Can you say that Harris is responsible for what happened the first 3 years and not responsible for what's happening right now? Maybe you can. Those are kind of throwaway statements, and that would come out. But going back to, I think, the original question that was asked, what will Trump do for serving anybody other than themselves? I think one simple word: legacy. And his legacy is going to be tied up in the MAGA movement. And I think his actions are going to take to preserve and enhance the MAGA movement. He did this, I think, already tipped his hand with J.D. Vance. There are probably other more candidates that could serve him better in the 2024 election, but they would not have enhanced the MAGA statue in the 2028-2032 election. So I think he's looking for the enhance the statue of MAGA, and that will be his main driving force.
Mr. Ferretti.
I've already gone.
Oh, you did? Oh, who are we missing?
Yeah.
Nobody.
We got everybody in? Oh, awesome. All right. Then you're done.
Let me add that somewhere my wife was nodding in approval, Rob, when you said she chose disgusting over inept.
Yes.
But in some wise, they did both.
And sometimes it takes more than one wife to get there.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
But we keep talking about what would Trump do. We've already had a Trump presidency. We know how he's going to rule. We know how he's going to govern. We've already had 4 years of it. So I don't know this attitude of making him look so scary. We already know what we're getting.
That's exactly right, Mike.
But
exactly right.
I liked what I had. I liked what I had back then.
It scared the blazes
But
out of me.
what we got last time was done because he wanted to run for re-election. That's off the table.
But we
now.
had a great economy.
Well,
we had
he ain't
peace.
gonna care
We
near as
had
much
peace
about
around
that
the
this
world.
time.
You know, I don't know what you want. Syria was a complete mess when he took office. The JV team had become the varsity team. ISIS was all over the place. And within months after he took office, gone. Haven't heard anything about him ever since. And the Middle East was at peace during his presidency. And now it's in complete shambles.
I think the greater concern, nobody mentioned this, so I'm going to throw it out there, see if you agree with me. Maybe you don't. I think the greater concern is the Supreme Court ruling of pretty much total and complete immunity while you are in office from your actions in office. And that's the very interesting part about any president's term from this point going forward, but especially about a second Trump term. And that is the total and complete immunity from acts in office.
Well, for your actions as official duties, but that's a broad term, and you know his emotions and personal agenda influence those actions, but those actions are immune. So I agree with what you're saying.
Amongst most people who have a brake on themselves or a filter, it's not as big of a concern. But we're talking about a person with no filtering, no braking, and very little interest in taking somebody else's advice.
Trump told us many years ago that I love the poorly educated. If the poorly educated can't vote for him, he ain't going to love the poorly educated. And he obviously, I mean, at the time that he said that, it was obvious why he loved them, quote unquote, because they could vote for him. If they can't vote for him anymore, he ain't going to love them either, even if he did, even if he wasn't lying the first time. So there's all kinds of groups in this country who think, yes, Mr. Trump's going to get the policies in place that I would like to see. I don't think he cares about his legacy. He cares about money.
Bill?
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought Mike Haidt hit the telling point a while ago by saying, like the product, what was created and the result of his first administration term. I think you're right, Mike. Among the Republicans, there is a large segment of people that look at what he did with just the opposite reaction to it, felt he was on the brink of destroying this country. Now, you
In
don't
what
agree
way,
that.
though?
I'm
I mean,
sorry?
in what way?
The health care, for example, the relationship with Europe, the relationship with our allies, the fact he catered up with the dictators of this world, the fact he put more in our deficit than any other president prior, before or after, the fact that he ignored COVID until he actually had to do something, and then selected his cure for COVID, were totally off the wall. There's a whole litany of things that can be used to have people become alarmed.
I get it, but I also see the Rocket Man that stopped launching rockets when he had a discussion with him. I see Putin.
For how long? He was launching.
He's still
not-
launching them
He's
now.
still launching.
Now he is.
No, he did it before Trump left office.
Right, on his way out. So my point is, he held, you talk about all the allies we had in Europe that he was pissing off. He was making them pay their fair share. So I don't have a problem with that at all. But maybe they should just live up to what they said they were going to do, and he was holding them accountable. So if that's pissing them off, then hey, let's piss them off.
Well, yeah, but it's more than just the amount for NATO. And they are paying more. They're not paying the 2% they're supposed to, but they're paying more. But the policy with Ukraine is
Ukraine's not part of
terrifying.
NATO.
No. But Ukraine is an ally. Part of our ally, and we've worked with them for years.
But not a NATO ally.
Yeah, I'm not saying they were part of NATO ally. You made the point with NATO paying the fair share, but there is a separate element. The separate element is defense of Ukraine.
But wouldn't you think if you're in Europe that it's more of an issue in Europe than it is for the United States, what's going on in Ukraine? Where are all them?
Oh,
where's France? Where's the United Kingdom? Where's Spain? Where are all them with their money and their weapons?
They're paying money two different ways, Mike.
To the same degree that the United States is?
If you look at individual countries, perhaps not. If you look at their individual contributions plus the EU contribution, yes.
Yes, but what you don't see is they all look to the United States to come over and lead, and to lead with their money as well as their policies.
They were, but not during Trump administration. They were not. They became very frightened.
Yeah, but there was no war in Ukraine during the Trump administration.
But look at the nervousness that resides in Europe now over the possibility that
there was
Trump
also nervousness with our enemies as well about what could happen. That's why we had peace.
All right, on that note, I got to stop because Mike Carl's losing his time. Issue number 5, the senior member of the Disgusting and Slovenly, Mr. Michael Carl.
Try to keep it simple. And the first day that we know the outcome of the presidential election, if Kamala Harris wins, what will happen to the stock market?
What happens to the stock market should the Democrats win the general election? All right, let's go to Chief Investor Bill Stubblefield for the biggest reaction because he stands to have the most to lose.
Elon Musk of Berkeley County.
No way. No, absolutely no. Don't listen to them, Bonnie. They don't know what they're talking
Bill
about.
Muskelfield. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Mike, we've seen an indication of that already. Once Harris jumped in the race, the market did not collapse. The market has done very, very well. Now there's an uncertainty, but it's a nip and tuck race. I think the market will continue the way it is right now. I don't think it's going to collapse if she's elected.
Bill says no effect. Larry?
I think that everything will continue as it has with record stock market records every few months. Now, are there structural things that could hurt us? Yeah. Bringing in a guy who runs $8 trillion in deficits in 4 years, that could hurt us. That could hurt us bad because eventually, I don't hear this a lot from Republicans after their guy set the record, but eventually those deficits are going to have an effect on not just the stock market, but whether or not you have a job. So I'm not worried that the stock market's going to crash when Kamala Harris gets elected. I'm worried that the whole country's going to crash if she loses.
Well stated, Mr. Schultz. We move on to Mr. Height.
I'm going to agree with the other side here. I don't think the stock market is affected a whole lot either way, whether it's Trump or Harris. I think that because the stock market has little to do with government and all about business, I think businesses find a way to be profitable no matter which policies are in place. They are very good at adjusting once they know who's in charge and which policies are going to be in place. They pivot in that direction, and usually I think that the stock market will continue to rise or fall based on business and very little on government.
It was a fascinating reaction when Trump beat Clinton. Overnight, the market dropped over 1,000 points, and then by the time it opened, it had gotten all that back, and there was a furious rally the next day, if I recall correctly. Joe Ferretti?
I think what the stock market is going to be most influenced by is whether or not we have a split government after the election. Do we have a Republican Congress and a Democrat in the White House, or vice versa? That's what I think the stock market wants, and I think it will react favorably if we end up with a split government. If we are one-sided, all Democrats or all Republicans in control, I think there will be a negative reaction in the stock market. But implicit in Mike Carl's question, of course, is that I'm sure in his heart of hearts he thinks that the stock market is going to crash if Kamala Harris gets elected, which is a sentiment I don't understand, because by most measures, this country has performed better than any other country coming out of COVID economically. We are on a trajectory right now. 15 years ago, we were worried that China was going to overtake us as the number one economic power in the world. You look at GDP measures right now, we are about to lap China. The trajectory of this country economically is upwards and rapidly going upwards, and it's because these administrations have done well. And I think that to say that economic policies are the driving force behind voting for somebody who really doesn't have the best interests of the country at heart, I think is a mistake, because this country has performed admirably economically and has for years, and I think that trend will continue.
Joe, math bears out what you say, and that is during a split government, the stock market performs best. I have researched this for previous shows that we've done, and that is actually factually true. The stock market performs best when there's split government. I've also talked to people who have said I'm going to vote for Trump because I'm close to retiring and I want my 401k to be better, which is also an interesting way of looking at things. And I guess as life goes, you're entitled to vote in your own self-interests as you wish. Mike, comes back to you for the final moment.
Well, the long-term play out is one thing, but I believe that if you don't have your stop-loss orders in place and that news comes, you're going to regret it.
Why do you think that, though, Mike? Policy-wise or financially, why do you believe that?
Because she is uncertain, incompetent. There's been no, and I'm telling you, I've paid a lot of attention to the ebb and flow of the stock market for quite a while, and I'm telling you, it will plummet if she gets elected.
My question is, will it plummet down to 19,000 where it was when Donald Trump left office? Down to the chump change numbers we were at when he walked out of here? Because it's doubled during the Biden term. Near doubled.
Well, part of that is
over 40 now.
Part of that is because of COVID. We were at artificial lows there.
Yes,
sure. That's not a genuine statement.
Yes.
You manage your money and I'll manage mine. But I
want to manage bills.
Sounds good to me.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll even say I'm sorry it happened to you if you don't follow my advice.
We got final thoughts, 8 seconds apiece coming up right after we do these. Stay with us. Final thoughts, 8 seconds apiece. We started the phone with Joe.
When you talk to these victims of the storm, you get no sense of their politics.
Mr. Schultz.
Have a good time. The rut has started. Dem deer are out there. Watch out.
Drive slow in wooded areas. Mr. Stubblefield.
Fall foliage is right around the corner. One of the most beautiful times of the year in West Virginia. Enjoy.
Mr. Carl.
Thanks to the tiebreaker rule, the Cards finished in sole possession of second place in the National League Central.
Mr. Height.
My favorite time of year, get out and enjoy the weather and all the fall festivals.
My final thought, Bob Nutting, please sell the Pirates. Sell them.
Yes.
You're not good at running a baseball team. Hey, Dave Ramsey Show is next. Have a great weekend. This is Talk Radio, WRNR and TV 10. We'll talk again in 70 short hours.